Three, two, one, go.
Would you like to go first?
I can. I've never had an interview like this before, so this is interesting. Uh, my name is Nelson McKeeby, and I'm author of a lot of book series, but the current one is the Tea Merchants. Not pirates. Pirates are related to it, but none of the main characters are pirates. And uh, it's basically a book that I wrote around. Uh, Set in a fantasy world, but it's based upon kind of 12th, 13th, 14th century um, Arabic and Persian culture from the Mediterranean. At least all of the characters are sort of, and I write a lot in Arabic in the middle of the book to kind of express an older language that they use. So, and I'm real proud of it. I like it.
Good. My name is Sinara Ellis. I have written a vampire series and I write everything. Horror, romance, comedy, the whole nine yards. My current book that's about to drop on Friday is My Forefathers in Eleanor. And it is a book about a man with multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder, raising a child fathered by one of his other identities.
Oh, neat. That's now you got to read it to figure out what that all means.
Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful. So how does your uh uh is this science fiction fantasy related, or is it more modern?
It's modern. It's very modern. My vampire series that started coming out last year is, of course, paranormal. So I do have that in common with a lot of writers here at Four Horsemen. So
Hmm. That's interesting. How do you find the connection? Um, do you find that there's crossover between your audiences?
yes, I do have crossovers. Thank goodness for that.
That's
So I have a few fans that are they read anything I put out. So
oh,
that's
that's wonderful.
that's nice.
Yeah, I have a big social media following that uh, they mostly came in from history,
Mhm.
from reading uh, unusual books about history, and then I would do a lot of I would do crypto history, and some of them wanted me to expand crypto history to more fantasy science fiction, and so um, and then I decided to just go wild with it and do a time travel series, and that was popular, at least amongst my readers. And then that kind of led to pulling out all my wasted education on on medieval history and turning it into a set of fantasy books. Um, I guess you could Have you thought of having a mentally ill vampire? I mean, not that any of them are not mentally ill, but
Oh my, I've already done that.
oh yeah,
Yes,
we
I
should
have.
talk about it.
Yeah, I have a few of the vampires that I've written are completely off their rocker. I have one that collects heads. So yeah, he's fun. And then my vampire series is actually alternate history based
Hmm.
reality. So, and it's worldwide because I also have a background in history, but not medieval.
Hmm. So yours is
Yeah.
more. You do modern history? What type of where? I mean, when I
Um,
say modern history, I mean last 100 years, of course.
300 years back.
Oh,
So I'm a real big fan of the 18th century and the 17th century. Very nice to work
What
around because there's
what
so much
region
to
are
this.
so you're an enlightenment, you're into the enlightenment, but what region? I mean, are you mostly Western, or is it East, or do you dabble in Eastern or something else?
I dabble in European history and American history.
Oh, so lots of tricorner hats and
Yes.
uh, movement from uh, monarchy to republics and all that stuff.
Hmm.
Well,
Hmm.
that's interesting. So do you have vampires, for example, that are do you have vampires that are from that era?
I do. I do. My vampires basically they're all over the map. And my vampires are not your classic television movie vampire. The
Oh,
main character, the vampire, is from Africa. It's the Asasa Bone Song. So my vampires are also regional to where their folklore actually comes from.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like, you can only write so many European vampires
sure,
before
sure.
the whole market is choked up. So
Sure. There's a certain point where bad English accents kind of and big teeth don't can only push you so far.
yes, definitely.
Yeah.
So,
Of course, you have a reason to have an accent, to have an English accent because you do have a real accent, not a bad one. But I
oh,
think
well,
that
thank you.
American actors playing, whenever they want to do something whenever they want to sound somehow in the past, they throw a bad English accent in the background, and I never hear Cockney though. Just no Cockney.
No,
Yeah,
nobody can understand it. So there's that. That and Welsh. Forget it.
yeah. That's the. No, I just often thought about that. It's when I used to work with actors, I used to think about the first place their brain would go is, put on an exotic accent. It's, the exotic accent they choose
Mhm.
is upper class British, Oxford British, and
Mhm.
but you never hear one of them kind of throw in, or except for boy, I can't remember his name. One guy who immediately did a during an acting workshop did a he did a great Cockney, but he used it. It was almost not understandable. And he was a vampire. He played. The reason I think of him is that he played a vampire in a movie.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
but I can't remember his name. He's famous for playing the vampire in a movie. But he did a couple of movies with Guy Ritchie,
Oh, okay.
and his act. He chose this very thick, pikey, not really Cockney, but more like pikey.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's a polite. I don't know if that's a polite thing. That's what he called it, was pikey accent. So I don't know if that's
Right.
um so your current book is obviously psychological,
Yes.
and you're hoping to get a lot of vampire friends in there. And who else is going to want to read it? Because that's what they always
Um,
ask us.
well, the audience is actually quite wide because you have the psychological, you've got the romance aspect of it, you have the family aspect of it. A friend of mine said this would be a great book for dads who feel like they're failing.
Oh, that's
So,
interesting.
yeah, a lot of single fathers out there that just don't know what to do because, I
Sure.
mean, for the most part, single mothers have, inundated society, but nobody ever speaks on the behalf of the father when he
Sure.
is in that, you know, living that existence.
Yeah. Back in American law, the presumption is uh, even today, the presumption is um, that the woman will have custody. It will have a mean. It's when they go into court, the assumption is custody by the woman,
Correct.
uh, and there's you if you're a man, you have to apply for. If you're a woman, the custody's handed to you automatically. If
Right.
you For good or for bad, and if it's
Mhm.
that also is kind of hard on women, but and if you're a man, you have to actually make a movement to. Although there's some states that are really working hard towards. I can are working hard towards more, more assumption of split duties. But uh,
Yes,
certainly the idea of a failing father is a big thing in our society. I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
And I think it's really time to give fathers their due, because there are fathers out there that do love their children and they do everything in their power to see their children, and sometimes that's denied, and in the end nobody pays more than the child.
sure, sure. That's the reason why they're trying to. A lot of states are trying to get the uh, I used to be a deputy sheriff, and we used to deal with having to deliver. We used to have to deliver, court orders to people
Mhm.
who were going to lose their kids, and we were the ones taking them from them because we don't have a choice. The court says do it, we have to do it,
Right.
uh, and you'd have to. And one thing that always made me curious about, and generally I thought of them as not the best parents. That would their first thing would be my rights over
Hmm.
my kid, rather than, because the courts were in that era were beginning to think about kids' rights. The first right is of the kid, and it doesn't matter how many rights you have if the kid has to. So it's an interesting concept for a book that you've got. My wife is a psychiatric nurse,
Oh,
and going to
okay.
be a psychiatric nurse practitioner, but she mostly deals with very ill people rather
Mm.
than. I guess is your character like non-functional, or is he functional?
He is functional on medication.
Ah,
So
ah.
I'm sure your wife knows many people like that.
Oh yeah. I mean, in fact, as a deputy, the first thing we'd ask people when we would show up at people's houses was, have they gone off their meds? And that, when
Hmm.
somebody starts kicking up a fuss and we've got a note that they're mentally ill, half the time the thing that triggered the was going off your meds. That was the thing that created
Yes.
the psychic break, the psychiatric break. So,
Yeah.
uh, well, I guess Tea Merchants is uh, my last book series was uh, biomythographic, in that I included the author myself in the middle of the book, and so it was very experimental.
Right.
Uh, so I didn't want to go totally mainstream, um, uh, I didn't want to go swords and sorcery. And I also, how you said that you get tired of the vampire that is British aristocracy.
Mhm.
Um, I get tired of the knight who is essentially taken out of the fields of France. The hero that is medieval. Just because Tolkien, grabbed a lot from Germanic culture, then a lot of science fiction and fantasy does that. And so I
Right.
decided that all of my characters uh, would be pretty much all Mediterranean. We call it the the Arab Renaissance, because they had a Renaissance that nobody's ever heard of. At least the average American doesn't actually think that there was a Renaissance, but at a time when they were moving water around, and they were studying plants and medicine in ways that wouldn't happen for Europe until the 16th and 17th century.
Mhm.
Uh, and one aspect of that is sort of the hidden history, is that there's actually much larger movements going on. I like to hide history stuff, like the Western European Renaissance came about because of the fall of the Roman Empire.
Yes.
1453, Rome fell, and
Mhm.
all these scholars ran out and brought their ideas with them. But now they didn't have to live underneath an emperor, and they populated all these universities. And the same thing could have happened the other direction. It could have happened to the uh, Arab and Persian cultures, except for the Turks were busy burning them down at that time. And so I tried to put all that type of history in to sort of begin discussions about history that we don't necessarily know much about, even though it's set in a fantasy world and characters are all fantasy and like the shipbuilding technology that they use is all accurate, is all period accurate. Um, uh, and and the idea that rather than looking for treasure or gold or silver, they could just barely care less. They are mostly interested in tea.
Yes, tea and spices.
Yeah, that Western Europe, we think about all the people looking for gold, but it was tea and spices that really pushed the European fluorescence um, outward. Um, so, what other interesting things do you have to say about my book or your book or anybody's books?
Well, I have, I don't know, lots really. So how many series do you have out already?
I have with Four Horsemen, I have two series of 3 books each.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then, my sort of touch with blindness has kind of slowed up. Not my writing, I've actually written just as much, but the editing became very hard during the last couple of books because I couldn't read. And so I was trying to edit by listening,
Oh,
uh,
okay.
which was not the ideal way to edit a book. Although it turned out okay, it was very challenging. And so I have the whole negentropy series, which is uh, um, I have a whole bunch of series that have been written but can't be edited until I get the eyes fixed.
Right.
Because I what I've done is I've switched over to writing rather than editing and preparing series, just because I don't have because the challenge ended up being not the writing but the editing. Being able to. So I have the negentropy series, which is 6 books. 4 of them are finished, and it's about one-way time travel. Uh,
Oh, okay.
uh, it's based upon, basically, what if you jam yourself into a cylinder where time can't move through the cylinder, and you open it up at the other end, and time, you're now advanced into the future. You can't go back again. The idea that you can go back again is something that's been explored a lot, but that you can only go one way in time in this series. And so you have characters popping out of cylinders in times, 500 years from now with modern sensibilities in worlds that are not necessarily modern anymore, not the way we think. Um, uh, and that's so it's called negentropy. And then I've got a series called uh, I just put out. So I'd already written a bunch of like non-books. A lot of times, what I do is I write books around, like with War of the Ravens. I wrote a whole bunch of books around War of the Ravens. A whole bunch, like a textbook and a scientific treatise and all this stuff, and then hid them around as part of the uh, because the series was biomythographic, but it was also a meta series in that you could actually find the main character's dissertation in a libraries that I went and hid them in. I went and wrote a book I essentially wrote her dissertation and then stuck it in libraries where people could actually find her, as if she was a real human being as opposed to, and so I have a number of crypto characters which exist in history. And so there's one series called the Herb Key where there's an herbalist in just pre-plague France, in Provence, France, who I published her books already, on that she's supposedly written. As I wrote it all originally in 12th century French and then converted it over to English so that it would read real stilted and real like and so those books, but the actual narrative adventures that she goes on are not published. They're written, but they're not published. So there's and that's called the Herb Key series. And I'm not sure whether people are ready for a series about a person who looks for herbs in the a science fiction fantasy series where somebody looks for herbs in the plague during the plague.
Oh, come on now. How are you supposed to make medicine, right?
That's the well, it gives me a non-traditional strong female lead who
Yes.
um the connection between Europe and the rest of the world was through trade, uh,
Hmm.
and that gives her the chance to basically explore another culture, which is uh, because that's the only, there was one pope who kind of went over and did research, weirdly enough, in the caliphate, Pope Sylvester II, and then but otherwise, the only people who transferred back and forth between the two cultures were mostly traders. The only thing the knights were doing was going over and getting defeated in the Holy Land. Um, and so that gives me a chance to kind of have a European eye. In the series, she goes and visits. The plague rips her out of her provincial attitude and pushes her into um, pushes her to seek a new life, and she ends up in the caliphate,
Oh, okay.
where she visits all these towns and meets all these weird people in the pre-Turkish Arab culture.
Very nice. So do you find a wide audience when it comes to your characters being something that they don't necessarily know? It's not mainstream?
Yeah, there's interesting is I find a particular audience.
Mhm.
There is most definitely something to be said about fan service, about giving the fans what they want, even if it's another guy with a sword fighting a dragon. There's a lot to be said about that because it sells books, and
That's
that's very important.
yes.
Obviously, we can't. None of us work for free. We have to, unless we're, you know, Bill Gates' love child. So, in terms of that, I'm not doing like Game of Thrones and rewriting the War of the Roses, which is basically taking a well-known culture and kind of
Yes.
that people don't really know about the War of the Roses. So what he did was he grabbed it, rubbed the serial numbers off, threw the book out, and did a good job of selling that book
Yes.
um, because it was the swords and sorcery people expected.
Hmm.
And his foreigners are vaguely Dothraki, they're
Yes.
vaguely barbarian kind of, horsemen from the plains type of thing that,
Hmm.
without a lot of, he didn't really draw those characters very deep.
Right.
Most of his drawing was done. But the fans who really like it are the ones who like the fact, um, how do I put it? Like of one of my reviewers of War of the Ravens didn't like it at all because she got lost in time. She got lost in the fact that characters were moving times and she'd never heard of any of these times.
Right.
As soon as you left the 20 years around our current world, she was lost. And she said it. She wanted the characters to, she wanted them to have a sword and a shield and there be a dragon over there. And, that was understandable. But that's not who really I was writing for. And um, so all the people who really loved those books, and it got good reviews mostly,
Right.
uh, were interested in kind of exploring a new culture. How do I put it? So one of my close friends just dearly love her to death is Mercedes Lackey.
Hmm.
Um, and I met her, I forgot where exactly I met her, but I had taken a writing class with Ursula K. Le Guin.
Hmm.
Actually, just a couple of seminars from her when she was in Vermont. And and Mercedes really inspired me to take characters and choose characters that were unacceptable,
Hmm.
that were normally unacceptable. Her first characters in her first books were very much not permitted characters. You know, they were not what the mainstream wanted. And if you look at her original reviews, a lot of people complained about that. You know, where's our knight with shining armor? She's got a guy with a funky horse, at least, you know, that's, or he's got a strange guy with a funky horse, or a strange woman with a funky horse who's not behaving the way we want them to behave.
Mhm.
But she became famous off of that. So it's not like nobody reads it. What it is the right people have to read it.
Right.
Um,
I understand.
and that kind of be like I said to be vampires. You know, lots of people walk by vampire series and don't pick them up
Right.
uh, because vampire's not their shtick.
Exactly. Exactly. And sometimes you just have to mix genres and for a wider audience at the end of the day, hoping that they can pick up all the nuances and put it all together themselves because we
Yeah,
already know the story, you know, from beginning to
yeah,
end.
yeah. Because we want to entertain people, but you can't. If all we ever did was give them what they already knew,
Hmm.
um, you know, that's one of the advantages with writing a book on the writing a confusing time jumping book or a book on people who are just selling tea, not not fighting great wars,
Right.
um, uh, and they're is that unlike my friends in television or film, I don't have to make all this stuff.
Hmm.
You know, I don't need to hire an actor. I don't need to come up with $25 million to populate to populate 2 hours of screen time.
Hmm.
I can have my characters do all types of funky things in funky ways that a screenwriter would basically write out. You know,
Yeah.
they would write it out to make it simpler.
Right. Yeah. So when you write these books, do you envision them on the screen since you do work in those circles?
Well, you know, I was mostly commercial for most of my life. I
Okay.
guess I did some script rewriting and stuff like that. But yeah, I think of them as cinematic in terms of, in a perfect world with a giant budget, what could I do? So
Hmm.
yeah, there is a discussion, there is a thought in my head of how would I film this, and
Hmm.
certainly none of my books are unfilmable. It's just they're not commercially filmable. I don't think. Um, it's like I'd mentioned Mercedes Lackey. Her books would be the most brilliant television series ever made, and she'd make a bajillion dollars.
Hmm.
But you got to find somebody to put the money necessary to build that world out, and you need to find a storyteller that does visual storytelling.
Hmm.
Um, like if you ever want to be infuriated for a couple of hours, not that people do,
Well,
take a look at Sci-Fi Channel's A Wizard of Earthsea and how badly they butchered that book
hmm.
uh, and lost the total thread of it.
Hmm.
Um, I think that that's an example of, but that's what the director saw. What the director was trying to do was get a lot of people who might be uncomfortable with the fact that there was no white people on screen, for example, that there was
Right.
no, that most of the characters were culturally very different um, in the Earthsea series,
Hmm.
uh, and try to mainstream it. So yes, while I write cinematically in terms of everything's a scene, and a lot of times my books are every chapter is an episode
Right.
in a larger series that has a and it is definitely filmable. It might not be filmable in the world we live in. It might
Right.
only be filmable in the perfect world.
Okay. Well, it looks like we need to start wrapping this up. So I'm Sinara Ellis. I have a book out at the end of the week called My Forefathers in Eleanor. It can be found anywhere you can buy books.
Yep. I'm Nelson McKeeby. The Tea Merchants are all three of the Tea Merchant series are coming out, and still on sale is the last series is uh, the um, the War of the Ravens.
Well, it's so nice to meet you, sir.
Nice to meet you.
And I will definitely be picking up your books because I love what you write. So,
Well, thank you. I'm
3, 2, 1, go.